welcome to the first day of the rest of your life. My name is Andy Zaremba, and I'm flying solo behind the helm today because Mike is actually off doing a bunch of float house related work. We got a lot of really cool projects on the go. And if you're sitting there asking, what is Float House? Well, you can visit our website, floathouse.ca. And what we do as a business is we have sensory deprivation chambers or sensory deprivation cabins, which are coming shortly to Float House Gastown. And what we do is we create an environment where there is minimal sensory input coming in from the environment surrounding you. So when you're in a float tank, there's basically no sight, no sound, minimal tactile sensation. You're floating in 10 inches of water, which is heated to about 94.5, 95 degrees Fahrenheit, and it has a very dense, the water is very dense thanks to the Epsom salt solution, and you float on the water effortlessly. And the whole point of it is to minimize sensory input coming into your body, and there's a whole plethora of benefits that happens when you actually do that. And this time of year happens to be a very busy time of year for myself, and I take a lot of projects, have a lot on the go, and I find that if I get my weekly float in, it definitely helps to down-regulate everything. I find it's really, really restorative for the nervous system. I just feel refreshed in general, and I start feeling that stress accumulate. So if you are one of those persons that are more of a high performer, or you're always on the go and you're always busy, and you can't necessarily get out of the city on a vacation, I really recommend checking out floating. And wherever you're listening to this, if you're in Vancouver or if you're somewhere else, you can go to our website, floathouse.ca. There's tons of information on there about floating. Or if you're listening to somewhere else in the world, you can check out flotationlocations.com, which is a float center directory, and it basically has every single float center in the world on it. And you can probably find a float center relatively close to your house because it's fairly popular now. But also, we need to mention our newest sponsor for Vancouver Real, which is Wise Monkey Tea, and it is coffee leaf tea, which is an original idea where they use the leaves of coffee plants to create a tea, which is really amazing because in the coffee industry, there's cycles, and within these cycles, there's periods where they grow coffee where the people don't have work simply because of the growing cycles. And what this product allows those farmers and farms to do in other parts of the world is to actually create employment and opportunities for people who live locally to benefit from the leaves, and they'll actually use them to create a tea, which is an amazing tea. I really enjoy this tea over pretty much any traditional tea. In fact, there's quite a few benefits to it, as a lot of people do experience things like headaches from tea from time to time, and this you get all of the great benefits of tea without any of the headaches, and it's also very delicious and very smooth. So it's Wise Monkey Tea. Definitely check them out. They're an amazing brand, and thank you for Max for setting all that up. And also, I'd like to give a quick shout out to the Mantalks community. We have another event coming up on November 26th called Overcoming Adversity. This episode won't be out by then, but we also have another event coming on January 14th. We don't have a title for that one yet, but if you'd like to get connected to the Mantalks community, we have an amazing community, and it was founded by Connor Beaton, and he actually asked me to take it over as the area director for Mantalks Vancouver, and it's been an amazing journey. And every Mantalks that we've done so far, we've basically packed the house, and I'm always blown away by the caliber of people who show up to these events. There's amazing people who are all basically like-minded. Everyone's trying to become the best version of themselves, and everyone's striving to do better with themselves and in the world in general. So I highly encourage you to check out a Mantalks event sometime. You go to mantalks.com to find out when the next events are, and the next one will be January 16th, actually. And lastly, my own personal coaching and consulting practice through andysrumba.com. I've just started taking this on as a side project. I have a side project, and I really enjoy sharing the wisdom and knowledge that I've gained over the past, my entire life, really. And especially in the past 5 years, my growth has been quite exponential since opening Float House. And I've learned quite a bit along the way from interviewing amazing podcast guests and from the entrepreneurial side of things and running business for over 10 years now. And if you're interested in those services, you can go to andysrumba.com and you can actually book a free consultation session with me. So today, without further ado, we have another. Were we introduced officially by Connor Beaton or no?
No, I think Nima.
through
Dr.
Nima.
Ramani.
Right. And we just had Nima on the podcast.
Yeah.
And we actually you're hearing the voice of Dr. Russ Kennedy, and you are the Anxiety MD.
Yes.
Yes. And well, welcome to Vancouver Real.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And you are an anxiety specialist, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
And you have the education to back it up, sir, which is amazing. You are a degree in neuroscience from University of Victoria. You're a medical doctor from University of Western Ontario. You are a corporate speaker and entertainer since 1999. And you also are a yoga teacher on top of all of that. So if that doesn't cover the whole spectrum of anxiety and stress and mindfulness, I don't know what does.
I'm trying my best. Last 2 nights I've done some stand-up. I was at Heckler's in Victoria 2 nights ago, and last night we had a great mental health show called the Heavy Mental Comedy Show at Yuck Yuck's Vancouver, and that show was awesome. It went really, really well. So, yeah.
How long was your set last night?
I was MC, so I went up. You do like 12 to 15 off the top, and then between 3 and 5 in between each act that comes up, depending on how well they did. But everybody did great.
So you get up there quite a bit, a lot of exposure.
Yep, and we filmed it too, so I'll have lots of stuff for my website to put up there. And yeah, it was really fun. I've been kind of out of stand-up for the last probably 3 years, at least on a regular basis. So to get right back into it and throw myself in like that was a challenge. For sure.
Absolutely, right?
Yeah.
It's like you have to work those muscles.
Yeah.
I find even when doing speaking that if I don't get up there regularly, if I'm up there fairly consistently, the nerves are reduced, I would say. However, if I haven't been up for maybe 6 months for whatever reason, and you look and all those eyeballs are staring back at you, it's like, okay, this is not normal. Right.
Well, luckily at Yuck Yucks, the lights are so bright you don't see anybody in the audience.
Oh,
anymore.
so you're just talking to
a light most of the time.
Yeah. No, that's interesting for sure. But you are a specialist in anxiety, and that's what your online presence represents, anyways.
That's what I focus on more than anything else. I'm not a psychiatrist. I want to put that out front.
Right.
I'm a GP. I've got a degree in neuroscience, and I've always been interested in neuroscience since I graduated. So I've probably done 15 times more work in neuroscience since I got my degree in neuroscience back in the 80s. So and the field has changed a lot. But I have anxiety myself. I've had it since I was a child. So and I recognize it now what actually was going on with me. And so I've devoted a lot of my life to helping people not have to suffer like I did, because I think what happens with anxiety is we actually do it to ourselves unconsciously. We're not aware of it. We start overthinking, and we start overthinking based on this alarm sensation in our body. And because that alarm sensation is uncomfortable, we make a story that's consistent with that discomfort. Excuse me. And then the cycle just continues, so that we make these horrible stories in our mind that are consistent with the alarm in the body, and then that revs up the alarm in the body, and then the alarm in the body revs up the thoughts of the mind, and we think that we can escape it by thinking, when thinking just makes it worse.
Right. It becomes almost a positive feedback loop where it starts getting stronger and stronger, and the more anxiety you feel, the stronger the stories probably become, and and then we spiral out of control and potentially have a panic attack. And we were talking a little bit beforehand, and we wanted to dive into this. Maybe this is a good place to start, actually, is, we live in one of, you could argue, the safest times in human history, especially if we're living in North America.
Exactly.
There is the least violent time in history. People live longer than ever before. Starvation's at a minimum. Like, we're knocking off diseases, and our medical system's always improving. Even poverty, like we're lifting people out of poverty around the world at a really rapid rate. So there's all these amazing advances going on, which would indicate everything is getting better. However, we have an epidemic of anxiety, right? And you were throwing some numbers around before the podcast, and it's amazing how many people are experiencing it. So with everything improving, if you look at the overall trends, everything seems to be improving. Why are we experiencing this epidemic of anxiety?
A lot of it, I think, has to do with just loneliness. We're surrounded by people, yet we're less connected. If you look at the 1950s, there was clubs, there was bowling, there was all these things that people would do together in community. And if you look at the statistics, people are doing less and less things together. There's something called the social engagement system in our brain. And we look at each other. And when we're kids, we play with each other and we look at each other's faces. And if you're playing with someone and we're having a good time, you scored a goal or whatever, you look at their face and they're like elated. Or if they've fallen and hurt themselves, that you can check their face. But kids aren't looking at each other's faces anymore. So we're that social engagement system isn't getting the same practice that it would if they were just playing together in the street. And the other thing is, I was at the playground the other day, and the parents are with the kids, but they're not. Their face is in the phone. So we're not even looking at our kids in the face anymore. So how are they supposed to learn faces and be able to self-regulate based on that social engagement system that's part of the emotional connection in our brain if our parents aren't even looking at us?
Well, now, why faces? Why would looking at people's faces help reduce anxiety?
Well, the social engagement system, like right now, you and I are talking together, and my nervous system and your nervous system are kind of gelling together. And we've all, kind of sat with people. It's like, I don't know about this guy. I'm not really sure. But when I sat down with you, it was like, yeah, I could, I like this guy already, So our nervous systems kind of join together.
Yeah.
And that's when there's this feeling of rest and safety, because back when we were tribes, when we were 150 people, we needed to connect with each other. And if you look at places like Mexico, these villages of 150 people or 200 people, there's no depression, there's no anxiety, because everybody has a job, everybody's connected, everybody is held to this level of, unequal in the community. And we are getting farther and farther away, and we're getting more into image and looking like what you were mentioning before, the Facebook, everyone's like little, I'm in Mexico this week. Hey, I'm in Hawaii. This is my
looking at everyone's
girlfriend.
highlight reel.
Yeah, exactly. And no one's life is like that. No one's life is really like that.
Right.
We all go up and we all go down. And I think that the level of loneliness, even though we're surrounded by people now, and disconnection is rising by the day. And the funny thing is, when we get lonely, we start feeling this sense of disconnection, and then we don't want to connect to other people. There is this, something happens in our neurological wiring that when we feel anxious or depressed, we withdraw, which is the opposite thing to what we need to do.
Right. Exactly. It kind of speaks to this idea of, we really can't squash anxiety or reduce anxiety by attempting to make ourselves more safe.
Yeah.
There's this idea that you should be facing your fears. And if you do that, you'll actually not necessarily become less afraid, but you'll know that you're stronger than you think you are. And that will actually spill out to other areas of your life as well. So if you're facing, for example, for me, it was public speaking. That was a big one. And it took time for me to get up there and start becoming comfortable. And as we mentioned before, if you don't do it frequently, it does, catch up to you and start creeping back, right? However, with time and with exposure, repeated exposure, and making it more normal, I found that, nothing really terrible is going to happen to me while I'm up here, generally speaking, and the anxiety gets quelled. But if I never went and took that on, and I just tried to avoid it for the rest of my life, I don't think I would ever have conquered that fear or anxiety.
No, it just gets worse.
Right.
Yeah, it just gets worse. I used to have a lot of patients with panic attacks, and they would have a panic attack on the bus or in the grocery store. So what they would do is they would say, because your brain is a compulsive, meaning-making, make-sense machine, you have a panic attack in a grocery store, you think it's the grocery store. There's part of you and then you avoid grocery stores, or you avoid the bus, and then your life gets narrower and narrower and narrower, and you lose that social connection because you're not going out as much, and
now you're confined to your home, maybe.
Yeah, and then the alarm goes up in your body, so your autonomic nervous system raises the alarm because you're not getting that self-soothing anymore. You're not connecting to other people and getting that regulatory effect of being around other people, and it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy where people just withdraw, and as you withdraw more, you withdraw from the very thing you need the most to heal from anxiety and depression to some extent, which is connection with other people. No one heals alone. And it's getting to be epidemic. We are so afraid of judgment. I made up this little term I call jabs. Like we jab ourselves every day. And it's a mnemonic for judgment, self-judgment, self-abandonment. So when you get stressed, you abandon yourself. You start thinking of worst case scenarios, which in a way is a form of abandoning yourself, rather than saying, look, we've gone through this before. It's not such a big deal. You can do it. And then the two worst ones are self-blame. Oh, you're an idiot. Oh, how can you do this? And the worst one is self-shame. Because the thing about blame is that you might share it with a friend. It's like, I was really feeling bad about not doing stand-up for 3 years, and I went out and did a full set last night. It's like, but I managed to, it wasn't the perfect set, but it was pretty damn good. I was pretty happy with it.
Nice.
But shame is one of those things that you don't share. I mean, Dr. Brene Brown talks a lot about this. It's like the shame is like a cancer. It just, if you don't find it early, it'll eat you alive. So judgment, alienation, blame, and shame, we do these things to ourselves, and that makes us sitting duck for anxiety and depression. And then we just keep going in that vein where we isolate more and we resist the very thing that we need.
I want to talk about that idea of isolating versus having social connections. Like as you mentioned earlier, we're jumping around a little bit, but we mentioned that like our nervous systems are essentially interfacing at this point, and you're probably picking up signals from me, and I'm picking up signals from you, and we're creating this sort of field of whatever, probably a state of being, right?
Yep.
And
or as Deepak would call it, pure potentiality.
Pure potentiality.
Yeah.
What mechanisms are at play that, like, because we're not in any kinds of physical contact.
Nope.
You can potentially read my body language. You can probably have subtle cues as to how I'm feeling. But what are there any other factors at play that help our nervous systems engage or interact that way?
Well, there's a lot of unconscious ones that come up. Just energy that gets, like sometimes you'll meet somebody, it's like, I didn't really like their energy that much. That was a little bit weird, But there's a lot of times where, tone of voice, prosody in voice, that's a big thing. If you go up, we used to have these stand-up shows in Vancouver here at smaller venues, and the new stand-ups would generally go out and kind of present their material in a very, and then I went out and I talked and I got on the bus and who likes the bus these days? Now that's an exaggeration.
Yeah.
But when you speak in a monotone voice, it tells the people around you there's some sort of danger. But if you have a lilt to your voice, if all of a sudden you laugh, if you move your voice around, it's a way of engaging. So eye contact, facial expression, tone of voice, the way that your body moves in a certain way, it kind of relates this sort of, we're connected.
Is that related to the limbic system?
Yes, absolutely it is.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And basically, like if I was in a state of anxiety, you could pick up on that. And do you think you could be unconsciously affected by that as well?
Absolutely. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think, when you're around someone who is tense and anxious, you tend to pick that up, consciously or unconsciously, depending again on how sensitive you are. Like I was born a really sensitive kid. My mom said, you would just cry at the drop of a hat. So I know that I have a very sensitive nervous system. I've always been like that. And there's pros and cons to that. One is I'm really good at reading people. I'm really good. My superpower is seeing someone, talking to them for 10 minutes and knowing pretty much what's wrong with them. Which was great as a doctor. But for me, when I would go into patients 30 times a day, it was exhausting. So this social engagement system that is linked to the emotional nervous limbic system of the brain is really something that's unconscious that we do automatically to kind of make each other feel more safe.
Right.
So leaning in the conversation or sometimes leaning back, just showing, look, I feel safe here. It's really important that our nervous systems connect, and then you can feel it from the other person. And it's called the social engagement system. And Stephen Porges talks about that a lot.
That's interesting. So now also I think what could contribute to that lack of social engagement would be if you are feeling anxiety and feel awkward or whatever, and people start detecting that within you, and then it also creates another, again, positive feedback loop where they don't want to be around you, and then that feeds your story of, oh man, like these people don't like me, whatever it happens to be, and then it just starts snowballing out of control from there.
Absolutely.
And it can spiral pretty heavy and pretty bad for some people. Like, have you seen some cases where like people have just kind of spiraled out of control and
won't leave their house?
Won't leave their house.
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely. It is one of those things that anxiety and to some extent depression too are this self-propagating, like they were talking about the alarm anxiety cycle. And that's my theory of anxiety, is that we think of it as a mind problem. I think of it more as a body problem. I think it's more the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic versus parasympathetic. So we're in this sympathetic overdrive all the time. Even when I get off the ferry here from Victoria, I live in Victoria now, and I get off the ferry here and hear that clunk clunk. As soon as I get off, my nervous system goes, okay, there is an energy over here that's different than over on the laid back island.
And this is laid back Vancouver
Yeah,
too. Can you imagine
yeah.
being in New York City
Oh,
or Toronto
oh.
or, you know?
I got to prepare myself for that kind of stuff.
Right.
So when you get into that sort of environment where you're already sensitive, and then you have an anxiety issue on top of that, the anxious thoughts feed the alarm in the body, and the alarm in the body feed the anxious thoughts. So
Right.
my big thing about anxiety is let's not treat it purely as a cognitive problem, as a mind problem, because we worship the mind in this society. We think the mind is everything. The mind is only a small part, or at least a component of our nervous system.
Right.
It isn't the whole thing.
Definitely.
So we split alarm from anxiety. We start dealing with making your mind and your body fit together, matching your breath and your movement, doing things like yoga, qigong, chanting, meditation to some extent, although for some people with anxiety, meditation can make them worse. But something that matches your mind with your body, and matching breathing with movement is great for that. So once you get into that sort of relaxed state, well, I call it the green state. I have this little traffic light analogy that I use, which is green is curious, open, playful. Yellow is activated. Doesn't necessarily mean bad, but it's activated. And Dr. Gordon Neufeld, the developmental psychologist, talks about when you get activated and go into sort of fight or flight, or at least sympathetic, the first reaction isn't fight or flight. The first reaction is actually pursuit. So we pursue that connection. And then if that is foiled, then we go into fight or flight. And the last stage is the red, which is what Dr. Stephen Porges calls the unmyelinated vagus, like the polyvagal theory, where this is the primitive vagus that runs through the diaphragm and freezes us. It's the same reaction that an animal will get when they're cornered and there's no escape. They just freeze. And we do the same thing. Humans do the same thing. So you were saying earlier, when we're interacting with each other, if you see someone in freeze, it's uncomfortable to match with their nervous system. So you tend to kind of back off from them a little bit, which of course makes things much, much worse. And to bring someone out of a red, dissociated kind of freeze state, you have to bring them back through yellow. You can't go, okay, you're frozen. Now I'm going to say, hey, let's have a hug. Let's be connected, because it won't work. You need to kind of move them back through that activation, that yellow phase, and then you can move them into green from there. And I think we have this thing in the society that we can just snap our fingers and move people out of anxiety. And that's true in your mind. You can stop your mind's thought to a certain extent. But as your body gets that momentum going, it takes quite a while. Like when you first started doing public speaking and you got off stage, it probably took your body a good 2 hours to kind of go, okay, we're safe now.
Right.
All right, we're okay.
Right. Yeah.
So we can't expect anxiety to disappear like that. And then we get sucked into the thoughts again. So my big thing is, like, when you're in alarm, realize, hey, label it, I'm in alarm. It's not anxiety, it's alarm that you're in. And then at that point going, what story am I telling myself? And can I not tell myself that story? Can I go into the body? Can I feel? Can I put my hand on my chest and feel, where do you feel the alarm in your body? And then connect to that, because as soon as you connect to your sensation, that's where your awareness will go. And if your mind is going out of control, thinking of all these stories, and now you've gone into sensation, you've cut 50% is now still in story, but 50% is now into your body. So you've made it a lot easier to move away from story. What I'm saying is that if you don't incorporate sensation of the body, you'll get trapped in that thing of your mind, and it will just go and go and go. Mm-hmm. And your ego will try and convince you that it has the solution in the story, and the story is actually just digging you deeper into a hole.
Interesting. Can you talk a little bit about stress physiology and what's actually happening in the body when you go into that fight or flight response?
Yeah. Well, I mean, cortisol gets secreted. Adrenaline gets secreted through your adrenal glands above your kidneys. So your whole body goes into, it's ready for a fight or to run, one of the two. And that energy has to go somewhere. So you'll sweat more sometimes, your gut will clench. That's why people with anxiety have a hard time eating, because your sympathetic nervous system will shut your gut down.
Right.
Because it doesn't need your gut. If you're being chased by a lion, you don't need to be digesting food, mm-hmm. right? So it shuts your gut down. So when you try and eat, the food's got nowhere to go. So it's just like, oh, doesn't feel good eating.
So that's why
right?
people can sometimes get nauseous or even vomit.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Because your body's expelling it. It's not helping you at that point.
Down. Yeah. Right. It's shutting the gut motility down because it deems that we don't need the gut motility at that point because we're being chased by a lion.
Yeah.
So Your body reacts to a thought exactly the same way it reacts as if it's actually happening. So the more stories you tell yourself of the future, because anxiety is always future-based. It's always what I call the 3 W's, which is warnings, what ifs, and worst case scenarios. And you'll get it, and it's always the future. So I always ask people, ask yourself, am I safe in this moment? Like when I'm with the siren going by and everything like that.
Downtown East Side.
Perfect timing.
Yeah.
Am I safe in this moment? When I wake up with anxiety at 4 o'clock in the morning, I say, okay, yeah, that could happen. That bad thing might happen. But am I safe in this moment right now? Can I feel my body? Can I put my hand on my chest? Can I get my sensation? Can I ground? And then, am I safe in this moment? And the answer is almost always yes.
Almost always.
So if you can be safe in that moment, and all we have is the moment, then you're safe.
Right. So that is a technique one can utilize to sort of stop that spiral out of control. And if somebody is having their stress response activated frequently, they're getting they get that cortisol injection, they're having the increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, all this, the effects that are generated from the stress response. What are some of the health conditions that can result from that?
Oh, high blood pressure, heart disease, coronary artery disease, stroke. There's some element of, dementia can form from, chronic cortisol use of the brain. I'll tell you about what cortisol does in the brain. Cortisol acts on this part of the brain called the hippocampus. And the hippocampus and the amygdala work together. The hippocampus is kind of the instrument in your brain that time date stamps memories. So if you had a traumatic memory as a kid, there is a sense that, okay, this happened in the past. Like I once started a fire accidentally in my neighbor's yard, which freaked me right the hell out. And then, so when I think about it, I still get freaked out.
Right, it triggers that emotional memory.
But I'll tell you what happens. There's two things that start encoding that memory. One is the amygdala, which is a very fear-based organism or mechanism in your brain. The other is the hippocampus. The hippocampus time date stamp that memory. So when I recall that memory, I have a felt state that it happened in the past. The amygdala, by contrast, has no sense of time. So the amygdala will encode that memory as well. But the problem when you recall memories that are just from the amygdala is they don't feel like they're coming from the past. They feel like they're still here. Right. So that's why it's so activating. So the thing about cortisol, getting back to your original question, is that cortisol paralyzes that hippocampus. So you're only encoding your memories when you're stressed with the amygdala. So in the future, when you recall that memory, there's still an element that it's still happening. So your body's going to react to that as well. So there's some therapies now where they're starting to sort of say, what else was happening that was kind of benign? What did the clock look like on the wall, or what did do you have a certain watch on, or what were you wearing that day?
So they're searching for triggers.
They're searching for something the hippocampus can hook into as sort of a factual way of hooking the whole memory together and going, oh yeah, that happened in the past. That's not happening now. Because when people get triggered by something, if the amygdala is only remembering what it was, and you don't think it's coming from the past, it feels like it's still happening. So your body goes into that fight or flight reaction like that old memory is still happening, like it's happening right now. So that's why it's really important to bring yourself into the moment, bring yourself into sensation, and just breathe and just connect.
Is that what's happening with PTSD?
Yes, absolutely. That's exactly what happens with PTSD.
So basically, hippocampus is not activated.
It's shut off,
and it's all amygdala.
It's all amygdala.
Okay.
So when someone hears the Vietnam vet, the classic story is the Vietnam vet that hears the car backfire.
Yeah.
Right. So that was only encoded by the amygdala, which is our protector. It's one of those things when you come around a corner and you see a stick that looks like a snake. There's two systems involved. There's the cognitive system, which is quite slow, and then there's the automatic system, which is quite quickly. So you'll jump back, and then your cognitive system will go, oh, that's just a stick. So there's two systems that are involved in that particular reaction.
Is that the same thing as the orienting reflex?
In a way.
Like when you hear a loud bang, and then all of a sudden you'll snap and look at that thing right away?
Yeah, in a way. I mean, the part about or movement, there's a part of our brains called the superior colliculus. I'm a neuroscience nerd. I can't help it. It just comes out.
Keep going.
Just like a vomit. I just vomit this stuff out. But the superior colliculus is involved in scanning your field of vision and seeing anything that moves. Anything that moves, like if you're looking at a field of wheat, and anything that moves in that, your brain will take you right to that spot because it could be a predator. I mean, not so much with us these days, but
that's hardwired in us.
It's hardwired in us, absolutely.
Right. So when we see that movement, we're automatically going to snap our attention to it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's automatic. And a lot of what happens in anxiety is this sort of hardwired, overworked reflex, this fight or flight reflex. And if we don't get that connection, it just keeps going. And if we don't get that connection, we tend to separate out of a feeling of safety. And then we wind up sort of staying in our house, not wanting to get out of bed. I've had points in my life where I didn't want to get out of bed to have a shower. Like I just felt frozen there. And now I understand that it's the vagus, it's the unmyelinated vagus nerve that's just kind of I'm in freeze.
Right.
You know, and what I have to do is put some music on and force myself to get up. And now, if I have anything like that, I just put some music on that I really like, and I just get up and dance. And if you have kids that have anxiety, you know, put some music on that they like. You start dancing, and as long as they're not, 12. Your daughter's 8, she'd do it.
Oh,
yeah. But once she gets, my son Michael's 14, so he's not going to dance with me.
No.
Like there's not a chance. But encourage them to dance on their own. Like movement is so important to break that. Dorsal vagal freeze response. Movement is probably the best thing you can do. And then if you can match your breath with that movement, because I really do believe that anxiety is a mind-body disconnect. So when we're younger, our mind and our body kind of just work together, and one sort of helps feed the other. And which is fine if you grow up in a nice functional environment. But if you grow up in a dysfunctional environment where, there's alcoholism or abandonment or abuse or something like that, that system kind of goes wonky. So we really have to recalibrate that system so that we can handle shocks to that kind of the alarm system coming up. Yeah, I'm kind of branching off.
No, this is good. Keep going.
But
I'm following.
You probably do this with your daughter. We used to play this game called Sea Monster. I would chase her around the house, and I would be Sea Monster, and she would lose her mind. She's screaming, she's yelling, and that kind of stuff. And then I'd grab her, and then we'd have a little cuddle together. But I didn't know it at the time, and Dr. Neufeld talks about
you're
this
training
too.
her.
I'm training her nervous system. I'm exactly training her alarm system.
I play that game, except I'm an eagle.
Yeah.
And sometimes if I'm in the pool, I'm a pool eagle. If I'm at the house, I'm the house eagle.
Yeah.
And I chase her around.
Yeah.
And she runs, and then I catch her, and then
Yeah, I know with my daughter when we go swimming, when she was 10, she was mermaid and I was merman. That was and she would not respond to her name, Leandra. I would have to call her mermaid, and then she would look at me and respond to what I was saying.
Awesome. So, isn't it amazing? She craves that game.
Oh,
she loves that game. She'll look at me and she'll go, Eagle?
Yeah.
Eagle? I'm like, all right, let's do it.
Yeah.
Right.
And they do, because intuitively they know that this is helping them. Trauma in kids is not necessarily a bad thing. Divorce is not necessarily a bad thing. Death of a grandparent isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, of course it's a bad thing, but it gives you this great chance of regulating their nervous system.
Yeah.
It's not the trauma,
So
it's how it's handled.
This is really interesting. This is an interesting point I wanted to talk about because it was actually, there's a little Canadian feud between two sort of Canadian intellectual icons, if you want to call them that, between Dr. Gabor Mate and Dr. Jordan Peterson.
Right.
And Gabor is now taking a few shots at Jordan. I would say, comparatively, compared to what Jordan's gotten in the media, much more intelligent and relevant shots, if you want to call them a shot,
right?
Or criticisms maybe. And he recently said in an interview that Jordan is talking about repression in children as opposed to, so like if a child gets really upset, he's teaching them to. Well, Gabor used the term repression as in like, but I took that as like emotional regulation. Okay. So how much, and then Jordan's like, or Gabor was saying that it's actually a form of repression to teach children to regulate. At least this is what I got from him.
Okay.
So at what point is there like, say, repression and not letting children get in touch with their emotions, but also teaching them to self-regulate so they can do that effectively as an adult?
I think it depends on the age of the child. Too, because
like they were talking young, like between 2 and 4, I think.
Yeah, I mean, my thing with kids is preserve the relationship at all costs, like all the time. I'm not a big fan of timeouts, especially kids who have anxiety.
Right, and Gabor is speaking of that as well. He's like, don't use your relationship with them as leverage.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or what they love, like taking screens away. I know if I take screens away from Michael, he's 14, it's going to cause a lot of friction.
Right.
But on some level, parents are screaming out, well, why, what do I have? What can I use? You can use your connection with them, and that you build over the course of time. It's really important to have that face-to-face connection. And before we started, we're talking about the fact that we're not looking face-to-face anymore. And the parents are busy. The parents are actually hooked on their phones too. So there's not this same level of connection that we have with our children anymore. And they're off doing other screen things. So it's coming back to your original question about repression. I mean, all this is psychological theory on some level too. And
Right.
there's a lot of conjecture that's involved in there. My thing is always preserve the relationship. And that's why, again, I'm not a big fan of timeouts for kids, especially if they're anxious. Because I believe all anxiety comes from either perceived separation or actual separation. So if you're pushing a kid's face into separation, who already has anxiety, you're going to make their anxiety worse. And that's a really key point. And I learned a lot of that stuff from Dr. Gordon Neufeld in developmental psychology, because there is this thing about, I used to do this thing with my daughter when she'd say, pick me up, and I'd say, no, you're 2.5, you can walk on your own. And Neufeld would say, no, pick that kid up. Whenever they want to be picked up, you pick them up. Eventually, they'll get to this place where their nervous system adjusts and wants to actually, no, I'll do it myself. So we as males will often push our girls a little past their comfort zone, which I think on some level is fair, but it depends on how sensitive the child is. If you've got a really sensitive child, I think you always have to preserve that relationship more than anything else. So getting back to repression, and can kids repress? Unconsciously, I think that they can. And it depends on how functional the family is. There's so many factors, especially with children. It's really, really important that kids just have this sense of, as Dan Siegel talks about, Dr. Dan Siegel, feeling felt. Looking them in the eyes, connecting with them, making sure that they're seen and heard. Because that's all any of us wants, is to be seen and heard, and especially children.
Right. So don't use your relationship with them as leverage. Yeah, it was an interesting question because in his talk, Gabor was mentioning how he felt that Jordan was teaching repression, where I think other people looked at it as he was teaching emotional regulation. So
Yeah.
what's the balance between those two things?
It kind of reminds me a bit about the mindfulness thing, right? Like how much, say, for example, both your parents were alcoholics and you felt abandoned as a child. Now, how much of that is worthwhile going into, and how much of it is, okay, I'll just be mindful. This abandonment has come up in me. I'll just be mindful of the moment. I'll see the things on the table.
Yeah, just be very present.
And be very present.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how much of that is helpful as opposed to, okay, both my parents, this wasn't my case, but someone I know experienced this. How much of it is worthwhile going into that feeling of abandonment? So on one level, there's this mindfulness thing, like I'm a mindfulness practitioner, I don't deal with the past at all, which is fine in a way, but you're never really going to get at the underlying cause if every time you bypass it by staying in the moment, which kind of goes against my original thing about am I safe in the moment? I know that, but it's a real structure, it's a real sort of trick that you can use when you're in a crisis. But I'm a big believer in trying to avoid using psychiatric medication if I can,
Right.
and just trying to get into that old pattern as to why you're like this in the first place. With me, my dad was schizophrenic, and he would often sort of disappear and show up in the mental ward and that kind of thing. So I really didn't depend on him that much. So as a result, I have a hard time trusting males. It's only been in the last year since I work with Connor and Man Talks and stuff that I've seen other males as a source of cooperation.
Right.
Rather than a source of competition.
Right.
So, that's the reason why I became a doctor and a stand-up comic and a yoga teacher, is to get this, alpha male thing to hide this underlying insecurity that I don't feel connected to other men. And it's really only been in the last year that I've kind of thought, hey, other men are really helpful.
Yeah.
I don't have to compete with them anymore. It doesn't have to be a pissing contest anymore
So
to
much
show
of-
that you're worthy.
Right. So much of it comes back to our relationship with our fathers, especially as men, for
Absolutely.
sure.
Yep.
Now, we've talked about, some of the causes of anxiety. We've talked about how it manifests in the body and some of the negative aspects of that. Now, what can somebody do? Let's say we are in, say, a negative spiral, and we're feeling a lot of anxiety. We can't get out of our house, or however that's manifesting for you. What are the steps people can start taking to help flip that around?
I guess it depends on how severe your anxiety is. Like if you're in a position where you're not leaving your house, that's a pretty severe state. I mean, I've had periods in my life for a couple of days where it's like, I don't really feel like going out and I'm not going to go out. But there's people that don't go out for months at a time, So if you're in that kind of state, that's a little bit different. I think you really need to seek some sort of higher professional kind of help, because something that you read or that sort of thing is really not going to help you. But for your basic, if there is such a thing as run-of-the-mill anxiety, which a lot of us have, basically, I think the first thing to do is be responsible for yourself. Get out of victim mode, because a lot of anxiety is victim-based. And I'm not trying to shame people about you're a victim, whatever, but just realize that anxiety has a lot to do with what you tell yourself. And if you're telling yourself that this is going to go bad, this is not going to work, this is going to be terrible, it's going to be kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy because of the confirmation bias. If you're telling yourself something, your mind will look for evidence of exactly what you're telling them.
Right, yeah.
So if you're saying, like, for example, looking at this interview today, it was like, oh, this could go badly, this could, I could freeze, I could, and then everything kind of comes from that. Whereas if I kind of visualize, no, it's going to go great, we're going to have a good talk, we're going to connect, that kind of thing. It depends on what you tell your brain. And so the first thing is try to get out of victim mode if you can.
So the stories that we're telling ourselves.
The story, if there's one thing I could tell people about anxiety is to get out of story. I had a guy come in to see me when I was practicing full time, and he had lost his wife. I think he was like in his early 50s. And he said, Dr. Kennedy, I am so depressed and I'm so anxious. I got to dig myself out of this hole. And I said, well, you can't dig yourself out of a hole. When you're in a hole, you got to stop digging. And that's what I tell people about thinking. Because your ego mind will tell you, hey, this is the solution. We just have to think more. If we think more, we'll find the solution. And chances are, 99% of things, if you'll think about the solution right away. If it's not completely apparent to you right away, it's probably unknown and left uncertain. So it's really important to stop thinking. Get into feeling. Like really, like I said, put your hand on your chest. Find where the alarm is in your system. Because a lot of people don't even know that. When you're anxious, find that sense of anxiety in your body. Usually it's around your heart area, but almost always it's somewhere between kind of your chin and your
I totally
pubic
feel
bone.
it between like in my throat and chest. Like that's mostly where I feel it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And usually if someone, and this is sort of my sort of Eastern philosophy, because I spent 6 weeks in India in 2013 just studying anxiety there. Anything when you feel anxiety in your throat, it's almost always you're not saying something to somebody that you should be saying.
Interesting.
That's almost always what I see.
Right.
And as a medical doctor, when I say stuff like that, I want to have a seizure because it's just like it's a little out there. But it's true.
Right?
But it's true.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, it's funny why you feel it in those areas of your body, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And find your alarm. Because find it in your body. Some people it's in their gut. Some people it's farther down. People who had sexual trauma, it's down around their pelvis somewhere.
Right.
Abandonment, abuse is kind of usually around heart, solar plexus kind of area too. And locate that and focus on that, because on some level, that could be that younger version of yourself asking for help. So if you have a child asking for help from your chest, what do? Do you push that away? Do you repress it, as we were saying before? What do you think is going to happen if you have a 3-year-old kid that just fell down and scraped their knee and comes up to you holding their hands up and asking you for your attention, and you go, no, push them away, distract. I go on Facebook.
People don't care about my pain.
That's what we do. That's what we do. We don't pay attention to that feeling in the body. And then when you have that feeling, connect to that feeling in the body and really feel it.
Yeah.
Because usually we, as we worship the mind so much, we'll go into, okay, well, what's the reason for this? Well, having problems with my girlfriend. Oh, I have money problems. So the first thing, like the confirmation bias, we will start thinking that this is the actual cause. What we've come up with is the actual cause of what we're thinking. But really, we have this saying in therapy, it's not about what it's about. So people will come in saying, oh, my wife is terrible. She does this and this. And it's not really about the person's wife. It's about how their mother did the exact same thing, and she's just
So it's
the wife is just
triggering that.
triggering the same thing. So getting back to it, it's finding that source of alarm in your body, because I get that to people all the time. It's like, where do you feel that in your body? And a lot of my anxious patients have never done that exercise. Never find what. So when you're alarmed, we were saying about what can you do, is find that put your hand on it and just kind of say, look, okay, I've got you. You don't have to get too deep into it or whatever, but just feel it. And just the fact that you're connecting to it will start easing it off. And the second part of that is like, stop the story, because you're not going to get it anyway. Unless you're going back to the original wound, which your ego will prevent you from doing at all costs, especially if you're alone. It's just connect and just feel. And then the last thing is just feel it and avoid trying to label it, because your mind is going to try and find out what the hell this is. So if you can just sit there and feel it, you can actually start to move it around. Whereas if you feel the anxiety and you go down the same story every single time, you will never change that alarm in your system, because you're diverting.
Right. What about times when maybe there is actually something going on in your life? There actually is something that is a potential threat for some reason.
Yep.
And you're getting anxiety around that. If I were to just say, oh, it's just in my mind, it's not real, then how does that work? Because it actually is real, and it's just avoiding.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's like, well, that can be your mind, your body's signal saying, oh, you need to go take care of that.
Yep.
Or maybe you're going through a situation like, who knows, you're going through a divorce, or you're going through some sort of legal problem, or whatever it happens to be, the things that are ongoing and impending, and there's a real threat coming, or you have an impending public speaking event, and you haven't done it for a while, and you're like, oh shit, I'm going to be in front of this audience, and that anxiety is real, because there actually is a real future event coming that is coming.
There is.
So what can you do in that situation?
Well, what you can do in that situation is find yourself first. Find that alarm. Always go to yourself first, because anxiety is always about the future. Okay, I do have this thing in 2 weeks that I have to do, but that's in 2 weeks. I have the next appointment with my lawyer for my divorce tomorrow. That's tomorrow. That's not right now. I know that sounds Pollyanna, but it's really connecting with yourself. Because if you can learn how to connect with yourself first, it's the old thing about putting your oxygen mask on first before you put on a child's or someone else's.
Yep.
You have to look after yourself first. And so many of us who are very empathic and sensitive, we get really used to looking after other people. Because when we were younger, I know this was true with me, I had to kind of look after my mom and my dad. So I became very good at reading them. I became very good at reading people. But I'm not really that good at connecting to myself, because I spent so much energy feeling other people and reading them. So the thing that I would say is always go to yourself first. Always try and connect with yourself first. If you can have some sort of mind-body process, if you can do some Qigong, if you can do some yoga, if you can do some Tai Chi, anything that matches your breath and your movement together, because you want to center yourself first. Because if you're not centered, you're not in your prefrontal cortex, you're not in the part of your brain that's actually going to help you anyway. Right? So if you're alarmed and you're in the back part of your brain, the alarm part of your brain, any solution you come up with is going to be alarming. So stop thinking if you can, move into your body, transfer your course into your body, into yourself, rather than what could happen in the future. Now, that's not saying don't get your documents in order and that kind of stuff too. But before you do that, like connect with your body. Do some dancing, like get into your body, feel your body. Most people in this society, I do not think, feel their body. I think we feel with our head, we look through things with our head. It's always our head that we're examining the world with. Just imagine, if you're listening to this right now, we'll just do like a one breath meditation. So just breathe all the way out and just breathe all the way in. Feel your body. Feel it in your chest. Just really feel the inside of your body, and then breathe out. And that will help regulate your nervous system. Once you do that, then you actually have access to the part of your brain that will solve the problem. Whereas if you're in anxiety and you're trying to solve the problem when you're in anxiety, it's like if you're being chased by a lion, you're not going to be running away at full tilt and look over at a tree and go, that'd be a great tree for a tree fort. I think I could put some plywood down there and some burlap or something. You're not going to say that. You need to get grounded first. You need to get into that sort of yellow-green stage. And then when you gain your hippocampus back, you gain your prefrontal cortex back, then you can actually do some thinking. But when you're in alarm, don't think. Thinking is poison. It's a poison well. When you're in alarm, stop thinking, because it's not going to help you.
So do something to help get more present, help yourself down-regulate a little bit, and then maybe attack the problem afterwards.
Yeah, that's what I do is when I get into alarm is I feel the breath going into my nose. And that's all I focus on, because that's a pleasant sensation for me.
Right.
And you'll notice that in your body, when you're feeling alarm, there's also a place in your body where you don't feel alarm. And focus on that, because the intensity of the sensation is where our awareness is going to go. So if you've got this sense of alarm or anxiety in your gut and you focus on it, it's just going to get worse. But if you start focusing on a place, this is why, I focus on a place when I breathe in through my nostrils. And this is why tapping, you've heard of tapping.
Yep.
This is exactly why tapping, I think, works, is because it's taking you out of this rational or irrational part of your brain, and now it's taking you into sensation.
Right.
So now you're feeling actually your body, and 100% of your activity is not going into, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, this is going to be the worst thing ever. And it's just your body's going to read that. The alarm's going to go up, which is going to and the cycle is just going to go over. So I really believe you have to break the alarm apart from the anxiety. The anxiety, in my definition, is purely just anxious thoughts and stories. The alarm is what actually causes the pain. So we can if you can learn how to sit with the alarm, it's so much less painful if you can sit without adding that story. It's that story that causes the pain. And this is coming from the Buddha. The Buddha used to say, the first arrow is pain, and it's unavoidable. We're all going to get pain. The second arrow is suffering. So when we get pain and we get the first arrow, we don't have to make a story about it, because that's suffering. So yeah, the pain hurts. But if you add a story to it, it's going to snowball. It's going to get worse and worse and worse. So if you can cultivate this ability to focus on something else in your body and get away from these thoughts that are just revving up the alarm in your body, then you actually have a chance to, move this alarm around a little bit. Rather than have it stay exactly the same, you make the same left turn into story every time you hit that stoplight of alarm, and you're never changing it. Because you're never changing it, because you divert from it. The problem's over here, and if you're over here trying to fix it, you're never going to fix it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So getting connected to the body. There is contemporary float research going on right now, and they're actually using this. One of the main medical reasons they're looking at the flotation tank is for treatment of anxiety disorders.
Yeah.
And the research going on right now is from an institute called LIBR, stands for Laureate Brain Research Institute, something like that. LIBR, the doctor doing the work on it right now, the researcher is Dr. Justin Feinstein, and they did their first clinical experiments on it. And they only did 50 subjects, so it's small, but they found a drastic reduction in symptoms of state anxiety compared to a control of somebody, say, sitting in a zero gravity chair, a comfy chair, within their home. So they compared the float tank to an environment that somebody could replicate in their home, and there was drastic differences between the environment of the float tank and something that you could recreate. And one of the things that's been said around floating for a long time is it does activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is going to help down-regulate everything. And there's a very good talk on YouTube, if you want to check it out, by Justin Feinstein from the Float Conference. He goes into much more detail than I can articulate right now. What do you think, other than maybe that parasympathetic nervous system? He was talking about also not default mode network. There was interior cingulate, something in your brain or something
posterior cingulate?
I can't remember exactly which one. Again, he can say on that video, but it's actually that one that gets the activity reduced, which has actually been linked to anxiety. It's the same area of the brain that gets affected by anti-anxiety medications.
Right.
What would you speculate is going on there? I mean, from that very
I have
undetailed description of it.
Everything. I'll tell you, I have theories on everything.
Sure.
I do think that there is an element of parasympathetic activity. I do think there's a womb-like element.
Right, like the water, the warmth, the darkness.
Being in the warm water, darkness. I think there is a womb-like element to it as well. And, I think that if you go in there with the idea that you are just going to let whatever comes into your mind come into your mind, because I can see sometimes if you are in there in a quiet environment, and this is why sometimes I don't recommend meditation to people with anxiety right off the bat, is that it can make their anxiety even worse. But I think most people, would get that parasympathetic, return into your body. And then, while you're floating, I would suggest just, really focusing on your body rather than the thoughts that are going to come into your mind. Like,
Connect to the body.
what does my right index finger feel like? Like right now, the people who are listening, what does your right index finger feel like?
Interesting. Yeah.
Because as soon as you do that, it's like, well, my right index finger's been there the whole time, but I haven't been aware of it. Now I'm acutely aware of it. Now there's an element of sensation with that. And there is this element of, okay, this is me. This is who I am. I am this sense. I mean, I know we're not our bodies, but there is this sense that this is me. This is this. Whereas
it's
this
partially
theory, yeah. Well, whereas this theory that we're kind of this out of our heads. We're always this mental construct of who we are. When really who we are is put your hand on your chest. That's who you are. Feel your body. Because we don't do that, and I think that's one of the reasons why we have so much anxiety in this society is we don't feel our bodies anymore. And that's one of the reasons I think we also have a lot of addiction, is because addiction forces you to feel your body. If you've got some, cocaine in your system, you're going to feel your body. You're going to feel, or you got some morphine in your system, you're going to feel that part of your body. It's gonna come to the forefront. It's forced you to feel it.
I don't have experience with either of those two, but they talk about with cannabis or other psychedelics. They call them. The phrase was unspecific amplifiers.
Right.
So basically, whatever's going inside is going to be more amplified, and you're gonna feel that more. I think that's more of a way of sort of identifying what's going on inside of you.
Yeah. And again, it's all theory, the brain is, there was a comedian, Emo Phillips, and he used to have this joke about saying the brain is the most complicated, amazing instrument on the face of the earth. And then I realized it was my brain that was telling me this. So it is one of those sort of things that your brain, your brain isn't your mind. The mind uses the brain to make itself. And I think when we get into this thing about believing that we are our thoughts, we suffer, and we suffer a lot.
Right.
And just realizing that you do have some control over your thoughts, maybe not directly if they're really, really strong, but diverting them into your body is probably the most healthy thing you can do.
So not identifying with the mental stories again. What other things people can do, like say with nutrition or proper rest, that can help with anxiety?
I mean, I think that's pretty. I mean, exercise certainly burns off some of the adrenaline, the extra adrenaline. I mean, there's a lot of problems we have these days with kids, and this is what I was saying before about the hippocampus, especially boys, playing these tour of duty, playing these fighting games, because their body doesn't know the difference between being in an actual war zone and playing this game.
Right.
So what it does is they get all this cortisol, which affects their hippocampus, which is what I was saying, and they're not doing well in school. And now it's like 60% of post-secondary education is now female. It's like 40. The males are starting to slide off the edge, and I think men are inherently less or more sensitive than women, and less able to deal with it because we block two things. We block their tears, which is a huge adaptation process, and we've also blocked their just emotional ability to talk about it. So of course they're going to move to anger or to alcohol or to drugs or to addiction because they have no way of dealing with it. I know Dr. Nima Ramani, we're starting this podcast called the Mangxiety Podcast. Or
right.
The Mangxiety Show.
You're the one he's doing that with. You mentioned that. Yes.
So he and I are doing that together and just talking about what stresses men out. Because now with Me Too and all this stuff about male privilege, the men are feeling pretty beaten down. And now, instead of this, what I was saying earlier on about being in this environment of competition, we are now forced to come together, which is amazing. So I'm seeing all sorts of guys.
Well, you're seeing a lot of men's movements going on.
Right.
Say Man Talk, Samurai Brotherhood.
Absolutely.
You're seeing a lot of men sort of rally around Jordan Peterson.
Yep.
And it's funny how it's so often the case that there needs to be some, for lack of a better way of saying it, external threat in order to unite a group, right?
Yep.
And in fact, it was interesting. There was a story about the Blitz when it was happening in London. And the Germans were just bombing the crap out of the city, and the British government actually they prepared the psych wards in London to handle people with like mass PTSD, and they're thinking that their psych wards are going to be packed. But what happened actually during the Blitz was the opposite. Their psych wards were empty.
Yep.
And the German attacks actually united the city. We saw the same thing during 9/11, actually, where New York was maybe sort of an unfriendly city, but then the city united against this external threat. Everybody was imbued with this sense of purpose, and like the psych wards were actually emptier than in peace times during London during the Blitz, because it's like that external threat forced them all to come together, which was kind of interesting, right?
Yeah, connection is what heals. Like, we don't heal in isolation, and that's why I think the future of therapy, psychotherapy, is going to be group therapy.
Right.
Mostly in Canada, I mean, we can't afford everyone seeing a psychiatrist for one who needs it.
Yeah, and it's not that available either.
It's not. It's not. And the other thing is the stuff we have in psychiatry is pretty still rudimentary. Like, even the psychiatrists will admit that, the SSRIs and the SSNIs and the
don't they have like just slightly above like actual placebo results?
Well, here's the way I kind of explain it, which is kind of backed up by the results. I would, for 100 depressed patients or anxious patients I would see in my office, let's just say I put all 100 on medication. I wouldn't, but so about 20% of those will have a reasonable effect. There'd be some, whether or not it's placebo or whatever, but
something's happening.
Some seems to have. Right. And then 20%, the other 20% will have no reaction, and the other 60% in the middle will have some kind of side effect. They'll have some sort of mediocre. So if you put them all together, it looks like, if you rinse them all out, they get so diluted that it looks like there's no effect. I think there is a little effect. I think there is this element of, if you get put on an antidepressant, I tell people there's probably a 20% chance that this will help you, right? Sometimes if they're really depressed, I don't tell them that. I just sort of say, well, we should give, because the placebo effect is huge.
Right.
Huge, and that's what they're finding in a lot of the old studies.
So you don't want to mess with that if that could help the person.
Absolutely, especially people who are suicidal, or they're just really at the end of the rope.
They're looking for something.
Looking for something, something to believe in. So I think the placebo effect is really important in the problem with the placebo effect in the antidepressants is there's a fair amount of side effects, sexual dysfunction, sweating. There's all these side effects that these drugs have. And we don't know if it makes the brain hunger for more of these drugs the longer you're on it. So there's a lot of controversy right now as to really, do the SSRIs actually really help? I think in a small percentage of people that they do. So if you're the lucky 1 in 5, yeah. But the bigger picture of that is, I used to see people who came in who did have childhood trauma that was treatable, that they would go on medication, and when they felt better, they felt no real compulsion to go back and deal with the fact that their father beat them or their mother was abandoning. They just like, I feel okay now. Like, it takes a lot for people to go in and face their old wounds, and that's really what you have to do to move through it. The only way out is through.
I thought it was interesting how you mentioned before that as well, again, the idea of like group therapy or just group talk even, or just being part of a group of some sort. Like, I find that was a very useful part of me growing up playing sports, having that peer group that was consistent and always there. And now people are seeing that a lot through, say, like the Man Talks Mastermind and things like that. And also, like you said, like, we have a problem with connection. Like, we're a lot of people are very socially isolated for some reason. Well, maybe it's not that unobvious as to why people are socially isolated, but again, these are all compounding effects as to, why anxiety, and again, in relatively great times to be a human being, people have a lot of anxiety and a lot of mental health issues.
Yeah, because I think we're really disconnect, and we're disconnecting more and more all the time. And what I said earlier on about, we used to have clubs, we used to have these communities that would be together, and you would get some identity from being, a bowler or, a knitter or whatever that you got together and discussed with. And now we're getting farther and farther away from that. We're getting farther into Facebook and the internet and what I call pseudo connection, which is you're not really getting that social engagement system by sitting across from someone somebody, even on Skype. You get it a little bit, but there is something ethereal about being in the same room with your friend, having dinner and talking and meeting each other's eye and feeling each other.
And not even like pheromones. We're picking up each other's
Yeah.
pheromones. Like, there's a lot of stuff going on there
yeah.
for sure. What about this? A lot of these groups, say like the Man Talks Mastermind, for example, also has an online component to it, where there is like, you have the in-person interactions, but then you also have like the group interactions. And there's a lot of people who are, I'd say, gravitating to these online groups.
Right.
And you do see relationships form, like friendships form
Yep.
through online groups. How do you feel about that?
I'm mixed about that, because I think that we do have this sense that we need connection, but if we're getting this sort of artificially, if we're getting it online, not in person, it kind of fills up that void a little bit, but it doesn't completely heal it. Right? So it's the definition of addiction, is that going back to something that provides temporary relief but no long-lasting solution. So this online kind of environments, which I think are healthy for information and that kind of thing, but you're not getting that one-on-one, real physical connection that you need to really get your nervous system regulated. And in a way, it becomes an excuse. Like, I'll get my connection on Facebook. I'll get my connection through this group.
Right.
And they're drinking seawater, and they're slowly just peeing out more water than they're taking in, but it appears like they're drinking something.
Right.
And it just gets worse and worse and worse.
Right. So you think it probably adds to the problem?
Well, I think if that leads people out of a state of isolation, where it's like, okay, well, now I've got this Man Talks group or this online group that I'm involved in. Hey, now we're having a meetup,
Right.
And you go to the meetup.
So it's like
great.
a gateway into social interaction.
Yeah, great. But if it's your excuse, if it's your only social interaction, you say, oh yeah, I interact with people all the time. I'm on 5 Facebook groups.
Yeah.
That's not interaction.
Yeah.
That's not going to, bring your brain to a state of regulation. That's just going to take you to the next meeting online. That's all that's going to do.
That's amazing. Are there any final thoughts that you'd like to leave people with today? Because you have a wealth of knowledge, and we love having experts like you on the podcast. And if you were going to leave people with something, what would that be?
I think it's just get into your body, like feel your body. And, a lot of times what happens is when we were younger, and this certainly happened with me, is it wasn't safe to be in my body. It wasn't safe when my father was schizophrenic. To be, not that he was violent or abusive in a way, but he was depressed. He'd lose a sense of reality, and it was scary for me. So I had this sense, well, it's not safe to be in my body. So I retreated in my head. So I'm telling you, hey, go back to that dark place where as a kid was really uncomfortable. But really that's what you have to do. But you can do it in increments. You don't have to all of a sudden go, I'm going to sit here and just feel my body, but just as a daily practice, take 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I get people to do, and this is one of the hardest things that I've ever done, but probably the most valuable, is go to the mirror. And this is what I say when I go to the mirror. I say, I see you. I know you. I'm grateful for your challenges and your gifts, and I love you. And I used to see all these things going, go to the mirror and say I love you. And it's like, well, I don't believe that about myself. So if I go to the mirror and say I love you, the first thing my brain's going to go is like, I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think so. But if I say I see you, my brain will go, yeah, that's true. You do see me. I know you. My brain will go, yeah, you do know me. That's true. I'm grateful for your gifts and your challenges. Okay. And I love you. So if you work your way in that way, but I'll tell you, it is one of the most difficult things to do, because I believe when you go to the mirror and you look at yourself, you are talking directly to your emotional brain. It's just my theory, and I'm sure there's people that'll say, no, that's not true. But I think you're talking to your emotional brain. And then do some journaling after it. And don't be surprised if you break into tears. And it is one of those things. Oh, here's something. Yeah, tears are so important, because it's our brain's way of coping with futility. If there's a death, if there's a relationship breakup, no chance that it's getting back together. Tears are really important, especially for men, because there's something that happens in the tear process that allows us to adapt to futility. Whereas if we don't have access to tears, and typically men aren't that great about talking about what's really troubling them, you don't have access to that either, it's going to go into some real negative place like anxiety, depression, alcoholism, drug abuse.
Can you go
all
into
kind
that?
of thing.
What does adapt to futility mean exactly?
Well, say you get, I don't know, diagnosed with cancer, right? There is this sense of futility at that point, like you're dependent on the doctors to fix you and all this other stuff. So there's something in tears specifically where it's like, okay, that was horrible, but I can deal with it.
So there's an acceptance aspect going on there.
Yeah, well, again, Dr. Neufeld talks about that as well, and talks about that's what we're doing to our boys is we're shutting off this valuable area of adaptation by telling them they can't cry. And then so we get this sense that when we're distressed, okay, that little door of relief is closed to me. I also can't talk about it with my friends so much, which is changing with Man Talks and the other groups. But we're getting into this sense now where we have to come together. Tears are okay for men. And I think that's the reason why men kill themselves much more often than women, is that they have no way of dealing with this sense of futility. There's a lot of futility as you get older. There's a lot of losses as you get older.
Right. Yeah.
So if you can, open up to tears, open up to start really connecting with other men, seeing other men as a source of cooperation as opposed to a source of competition, and just sort of being a little more open. You don't have to go and, shout out your problems, but just be a little more open. You'd be surprised at your buddies how they may react. And
well, the funny thing about that too is you're basically being brave and giving people permission to do the same thing when you do it.
Absolutely.
Right? It's like, oh, I can talk to you about that?
Yeah.
Oh, that wasn't like that before, and now we can go to this deeper level, right?
Yeah. And Russell Brand talks about that too. He says that, he wrote down all the things that he was ashamed of or whatever and shared them with a friend, And when you share shame, and shame is probably the most destructive element, emotion, whatever you want to call it, especially in the male psyche, but equally for women. If you share that shame, you diffuse it. But if you don't talk about it, it just festers inside of you.
It kind of speaks to that idea of maybe back in the day when we were more involved with the church, like confession. Mm-hmm. Like maybe that could be like the utility of confession. You go there and you're like, this is everything that I've been doing wrong.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's sort of, and the priest is like, okay, go do whatever you got to do. And then all of a sudden now you have that sense of shame and guilt diminished, right?
Yep. And you feel that there's some organizational body or some sort of almost parental acceptance of that, because that's what we wanted as kids. A lot of our shame started when we were kids. We couldn't share them with our parents because we were too ashamed. So if you have this sort of overseer, this kind of, whether it's the church or whether or not it's your group or whatever that accepts you, you'd be surprised at the stuff that you can share with them, and that they'll say, oh yeah, well, I can do you one better as far as that kind of stuff goes. I've done this. There's nothing you've done that hasn't been done by a million people. There's no affair. There's no
and
harm
probably a
you've
lot
done
worse
to another.
too.
Yeah, and a lot worse. And yet we hold ourselves to this level of, our egos
Perfection.
are always, there is so much judgment now.
Yeah.
And that's one thing about stand-up comedy is that, I see the comedians and how they don't do well mentally because I think they're always steeped in judgment. We're always looking for things that are going wrong.
Right. And they're holding to that really high standard too. Like
absolutely. And if you're either funny or you're not, they either laugh or they don't.
Yeah.
So if you're out there and they're not laughing, who's that on?
There's your automatic feedback right
for
there.
Sure. Oh, yeah. And the alarm goes up, and then it just gets worse.
Public speaking's challenging for sure, but I imagine stand-up comedy is the next level, because one of the harder things they do in public speaking is to get authentic laughs.
Right. Yeah.
I mean,
and
what a great exercise you're taking on there.
Yeah, and that's really true, because when you're out there as a stand-up, you are out there, and there is a benchmark. If you're a speaker, you can speak. They don't have to laugh. If you say something interesting, you're fine. But as a comic, if they're not laughing, you're in trouble. You're in trouble. Mm-hmm. So that's your benchmark. That's your metric. And if they are not laughing, that is really difficult to handle. So, it is just one of those
another
things.
challenge.
Yeah, it's another challenge. But, basically, if I had one message, it's like separate the alarm from your body, from the thoughts of your mind. You do that, and you can start to heal from anxiety.
There we go. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. How can people get in touch with you on social media? You have your website.
Yeah, I have a website. My little catchphrase is the Anxiety MD.
Yeah.
So my YouTube's on that, my Facebook's on that. Pretty soon, Dr. Nima Ramani and I will have the Manxiety
Manxiety.
podcast, which is basically anxiety podcast with an M on it. So we'll specifically deal with what stresses men out. We've already filmed 8 episodes, and we're going to put that out soon. But the Anxiety MD is probably the easiest way to find me. Google it, and you'll find me.
Amazing. Well, I'm looking forward to that new podcast. I'm sure you and Dr. Nima are going to have a ton of value to give there. So that's
be fun.
a great resource for men because, men need the more resources like that. So
We sure do.
Yeah.
Yeah, we sure do.
So thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, if you like what you heard today, folks, if you like what you heard, just leave us a review or rating on iTunes, YouTube, or Stitcher. It really helps us get found. If you wanted to give floating a try, you can go to the website floathouse.ca and use the promo code Vancouver Real. That will get you a 20% discount on a single float. And of course, to stay up to date on Man Talks events, it's mantalks.com. And the Vancouver Real community page is quite active now. And I think that's everything for today. So thank you for joining us and really appreciate you. Until next time, to whatever is.